All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today we're going to trace the absolutely astonishing butterfly effect of a single plant species, one that honestly fundamentally reshaped human civilization. Because, before the warning labels, the billion-dollar lawsuits, or the massive multinational corporations, there was simply a leaf. Just a leaf growing quietly across the Americas. But this little leaf would go on to generate unimaginable wealth, fuel global trade, inspire revolutions, and ultimately cause more preventable deaths than almost any other consumer product in human history. So how did a plant once believed to literally speak to the gods become responsible for the deaths of millions? It's a staggering question, isn't it? To really wrap our heads around this, we have to follow tobacco's incredibly dramatic transformation. We're going from a sacred indigenous sacrament all the way to a highly commodified, industrialized, and downright deadly global addiction. We're going to explore how something that started with such profound reverence morphed into a massive commercial empire that actually impacted the air we breathe and the laws we live by. So, here is our roadmap. We'll be tracing this wild journey from ancient spiritual ceremonies some 8,000 years ago straight through the colonial boom, the Industrial Revolution, and finally landing on the monumental medical reckonings of the modern era. Part 1. Sacred Origins. Tobacco in the Pre-Columbian Americas. For thousands of years, way before written history, indigenous peoples across North and South America cultivated this plant. And to them, it absolutely wasn't some casual luxury. It was considered alive. It was powerful. Healers actually used its smoke to carry prayers up to spiritual beings. And what's really fascinating here is the stark contrast between two entirely different worldviews. On one hand, you have the deeply intentional, respectful use by indigenous cultures. It was highly ceremonial. Sharing smoke meant building trust and diplomacy. But on the other hand, you have the thoughtless, habitual consumption that was eventually adopted by Europeans. They started smoking just because they were bored or working or simply because their friends were doing it. And that right there, that complete loss of intention, is exactly where the psychological foundations of addiction were laid. Part 2. Cultivating a Global Empire, 1492 and the Commercialization of a Plant. That dramatic shift in how the plant was used really kicked off when Christopher Columbus and his crew arrived in 1492. What started out as mere European curiosity rapidly completely snowballed into an absolute obsession. I mean, get this, doctors were mistakenly prescribing it for everything from toothaches to the literal plague. But not everyone was a fan. Take King James I of England back in 1604. He actually accurately predicted its dangers centuries before science could prove them. But when he realized just how fiercely attached his people were to the habit, he did what pretty much any opportunistic monarch would do. He heavily taxed it to pad the royal pockets. It was the birth of a very familiar trend, governments officially condemning the habit while quietly collecting all that cash. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, the English colony of Jamestown was literally starving to death. Seriously, it was on the brink of collapse. That is, until a guy named John Rolfe took a massive gamble in 1607 by planting a sweeter Caribbean tobacco seed. The native Virginian tobacco had been way too harsh for English tastes, but the sweeter variety, it was a massive hit. Almost overnight, Virginia had a lifeline product that all of Europe was desperately craving, and demand absolutely exploded. But, and this is a huge, tragic but, this economic solution created massive atrocities. You see, tobacco is an incredibly demanding crop. As European demand went through the roof, plantations needed more and more land, and crucially, more workers. This insatiable, relentless appetite directly fueled the horrific expansion of the transatlantic slave trade, starting in 1619. Literally every barrel of tobacco shipped off to Europe was packed with hidden stories of bleeding hands, destroyed families, and generations of forced human exploitation. And back in Europe, consumers were just happily puffing away, completely oblivious to the unimaginable suffering happening in the Americas. And frankly, they were completely oblivious to what was happening inside their own bodies, too. They thought tobacco simply eased their daily stress. But in reality, the nicotine was rapidly hitting their brain's dopamine receptors in a matter of seconds. It's like a chemical hijacking. Without even realizing it, they were trapped. When they felt anxious without a pipe, they thought tobacco was the cure, when in fact it was just temporarily relieving the very chemical cravings it had created in the first place. Part 3. The Cigarette Revolution. Mass production and the birth of modern advertising. So, for centuries, tobacco was mostly smoked in really messy pipes or it was chewed. But then came convenient, paper-wrapped cigarettes and a truly staggering number, 120,000. That right there represents the daily output of the Bonsack cigarette-making machine, which was invented in 1880. To put that into perspective, before this machine, human workers could only hand-roll a few thousand cigarettes a day. This invention immediately made tobacco unimaginably cheap to produce. Prices absolutely plummeted, profits skyrocketed, and the modern tobacco empire as we know it was well and truly born. But here's the thing, having cheap cigarettes wasn't enough. They had to make people desperately want them. And it's honestly shocking how deeply they engineered our culture to do it. They didn't just sell a product, they used collectible cards, intense Hollywood glamorization, and brilliant, frankly manipulative marketing. Take Edward Brenner's famous 1929 Torches of Freedom campaign, which successfully and cynically marketed smoking to women as a symbol of liberation. And if that wasn't enough, during the World Wars, governments literally distributed cigarettes as essential military rations. They instantly created millions of lifelong, deeply addicted customers out of soldiers. Part 4. Science, Denial, and Reckoning, the battle for public health. Let's fast forward to the mid-20th century. The so-called golden age of smoking suddenly hit a devastating medical reckoning. Doctors across the board started noticing something terrifying, this massive, unprecedented spike in lung cancer, which used to be a remarkably rare disease. Scientists knew they needed hard evidence. So researchers like Fritz Lichten in the 1930s, and later Richard Dahl and Austin Bradford Hill, painstakingly tracked the long-term health of British doctors. And the patterns? They were undeniable. The more you smoked, the higher your risk of dying from lung cancer. This rigorous, mounting scientific proof finally culminated in the explosive 1964 U.S. Surgeon General report, firmly stating to the public that cigarettes caused disease. Now, this is the crucial point. How did the industry react to this bombshell? Well, they certainly didn't pull their products. Instead, the tobacco industry essentially invented the modern corporate damage control playbook. Step 1, acknowledge public concern. Step 2, claim there's no conclusive proof. Step 3, promise to fund more research. They intentionally manufactured scientific uncertainty to protect their billions, rather than actually proving their product was safe. Their whole goal was just to delay consensus, and sadly for decades, it completely worked. Part 5. A complicated modern legacy. Lawsuits, leaks, and e-cigarettes. But you could only hide the truth for so long. The industry's carefully constructed facade of uncertainty finally crumbled in the 1990s. Massive state lawsuits brought an absolute flood of secret internal documents, memos and research reports that were never ever meant for public eyes, straight into the spotlight. And hidden within those documents were incredibly damning statements, like this simple, chilling quote, "Nicotine is addictive." Remember King James's intuition from centuries earlier? Well, this internal memo definitively proves that the modern industry had long understood exactly how central chemical dependence was to their entire business model, even as they stood before Congress and publicly denied it. These devastating internal leaks triggered the monumental Master Settlement Agreement in 1998. It was massive. 46 U.S. states forced the major tobacco companies to cough up hundreds of billions of dollars to cover healthcare costs. It also entirely dismantled their youth-targeted marketing campaigns. It meant putting a swift end to cartoon mascots like Joe Camel and strictly reducing outdoor advertising. And the fallout from this went totally global. Governments around the world took decisive action to protect public health. We started seeing widespread smoking bans in restaurants, bars, and airplanes, fundamentally changing the actual air we breathe in public spaces. Countries introduced highly graphic health warnings, and some even enacted plain packaging laws to completely strip away the elegant, appealing branding. In 2003, the World Health Organization even adopted a massive international treaty to control tobacco globally. It felt like a real turning point. But this industry, it's the ultimate survivor. With traditional smoking rates dropping in many high-income nations, they've adopted once again. They've expanded heavily into developing nations, and they've pushed a brand new technology, electronic cigarettes. Instead of burning tobacco leaves, these devices heat a liquid containing nicotine into an inhalable aerosol. With their incredibly sleek designs and bright, candy-like flavors, they've sparked an intense global debate. Are they actually a safer alternative for adults trying to quit, or are they just a sneaky new way to hook a whole new generation on nicotine? So wrapping up this explainer, we're really left with a critical question to chew on. Will this new technology actually reduce harm in the long run, or is history just quietly repeating itself? It stands as a pretty stark reminder of our incredible, complicated ability to take a simple, once sacred plant and turn it into a perpetual, world-altering commodity. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive into the astonishing history of tobacco. Catch you next time.